also it comes back to agility because you really cannot be agile when you have so many constraints on you, you know? And so I'm trying to get people to recapture the original spirit of agility, the 4 values in the manifesto, simply because I think if you focus on those, then all the other stuff kind of falls out.
What's your opinion and thoughts and experience with AI so far?
I am very pleased I've lived long enough to see it. And I am totally in awe of the people who thought they could take something as simple as chaining together, phonemes or whatever, and coming up with intelligent responses.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Dev Life podcast. We are really excited to be here. As always, everyone, I'm here with Matt, my co-producer, my co-host, my very, very good friend. And then we have really a very special guest who I don't think really needs much of an introduction. He's had a massive impact on our industry in software development. For what, 25 plus years ago, Dave?
I guess, yeah.
Everyone, welcome to Dave Thomas from really a number of books, but perhaps most well known from the Pragmatic Programmer. He was also one of the original constructors and signatories of the Agile Manifesto. So yeah, welcome to the show.
Well, appreciate that, Brooke. Thank you. Hi, Matt.
Hey.
Dave, it's been, I don't know, I kind of met you like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we've had fun chatting every once in a while. What I've really appreciated about you is how you're just so open to making yourself available to the community and having these kinds of open discussions and not just being behind the book, so to say, but keeping the conversations alive and very real. But what I thought would be fun, what Matt and I really thought, oh, this would be a great topic to talk about today, is taking your ideas from the Pragmatic Programmer, but kind of cracking into them. So much has changed even just from 6 months ago, right? With AI and just changes in technology in general. But we really wanted to get into, how do you see things changing for 2026? Has anything really changed? Where do you feel things are today? And what I'd love to learn about as well is, where are you with all of this? How has it changed your personal approach to engineering? And what tools are you using? All of that. So
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, I can say that's a topic that's really high up on my mind right now, because I'm living it, if nothing else. And it's also not often you get to, quite a lot of the time, the industry changes, but you don't actually notice because it's kind of like, behind the scenes. And 2 years later, you look back and go, oh, wow, that was wild. We actually did something totally different. Now it's changing, and so it's not often you get that opportunity to kind of paddle in front of the wave and get your speed up so you can actually surf a bit better. I don't know if I have any particularly great insights, but I love talking about it. So let's go.
All right. Before we get into it, I did want to ask, because you did just recently publish a new book called Simplicity. So I just wanted to make sure we had a little time for you to share that before we really dive into anything else. But can you tell everyone more about the book and why you wanted to share it with the world, like now, given everything that is going on?
Sure. I mean, let's shameless shilling department. So I have been really annoyed with the industry as a whole for the last maybe half dozen years, because I think we as a community really, really enjoy embracing complexity. We love looking for new platforms and new techniques and new languages and new everything else. And we pile them all into our projects. And then a new project comes along and we sit there and look for a whole new set of things we can use. And part of that is people wanting to pad their resumes and say, I am an expert on X, Y, and Z, and I've got to do all of them. But part of it, I think, is just our nature. We like bright, shiny things. But the result of that is that we have now, a basic out-of-the-box JavaScript project with really not much going on probably has a couple of thousand dependencies. By the time you have a look in your packages, it's got, 2,000 easy. And that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. To have that many dependencies is to invite trouble, right? It makes your software so vulnerable and so hard to deal with, and not just security vulnerable, but 2 years from now, half of those packages will either be out of date or not available anymore. So that'll be a problem. It's not just that, though. It's everything. It's the way we write software. It's the way we over-embellish the software we write. We delight in making everything abstract and putting layers and layers and layers in our software. And I think I was just fed up with it. And so this is my, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore moment. And that's why I wrote the book. And basically, it's just an argument to say, let's try to reclaim simplicity, right? I'm not saying be simplistic, but I am saying if we can make things simpler, then we'll all have a bit more fun and the projects will be easier to work with, the software will be more reliable, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the book. It was actually an interesting book because I wrote it 3 separate times. This is the 3rd time. It was really, really hard to write because the last thing I wanted to do is say, this is how you do things in a simple way, because that would be meaningless. I had to find a way to say, this is how you discover how to do things in a simple way, and then go work out for yourself what that means for you. And that was the interesting part. But I'm very happy with it. I think it came out well.
Good.
Amazing. I am such a big fan of your work. Pragmatic Programmer, I have nearby, and I think I've read through it like 3 times. I reference it all the time.
Oh.
I'm a big fan, so I will be picking up simplicity, and that's awesome. It
Well,
kind
that's
of
very
reminds
kind of
me
you.
of the I've seen a meme going around the internet of like blocks, like kid blocks, and there's like one little block that if it tips over, the whole tower falls, right? And
Yep.
that's probably the packages.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's all sorts of ways we're doing that,
Yeah, absolutely.
And it comes back to agility, because you really cannot be agile when you have so many constraints on you. And so I'm trying to get people to recapture the original spirit of agility, the 4 values in the manifesto, simply because I think if you focus on those, then all the other stuff kind of falls out, And so that's kind of like the cornerstone of it's kind of like a stealth way of getting people to think about agility and not, quote, agile, the big industrial complex stuff.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get more into our discussion, I do have a little bit of an icebreaker question for you, which is, yeah, it is. What is something in your life outside of tech that has shaped the way you show up in your career?
Shaped the way I show up in my career. I think everything in my life has shaped the way I show up in my career, and I think it does for everybody. I think I had a friendship when I was in the equivalent of high school with a guy called Toby Bailey. And he and I were like really quite similar, but we would challenge each other in a kind of friendly way to kind of dig deeper into things and understand things better. We were very geeky. And I think the ability that we gained from that to be able to discuss and debate things passionately but not aggressively, I think has made a big difference to me. We had a game we'd play quite often where we would argue something and then like halfway through switch to opposite positions. So he would take mine, I would take his, and then we would carry on discussing. And that's stayed with me. I think that's an incredibly important thing to be able to do, is to look at other people's perspective and try and work out why it is they're saying what they're saying. Because it's really easy to disagree with the result of what someone's thinking. But until you understand why they're thinking it, it's kind of like you don't have all the information, you know? So I guess if there was one thing, I would probably point at that.
I love that. Like sometimes I feel like we in life, at least I do this sometimes, I'll be listening to something someone else says, and I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say next, you know? But we should actually be listening. Like maybe they know something we don't, that we can learn from them. And so.
And they have experiences that we don't. And so their perspective is probably different because of those different experiences.
I am a very firm believer in the fact that there are no absolutes, you know, and so I think that there is always context that you have to be aware of. It's actually funny. I was reorganizing my blog yet again, and I came across something I posted 20 years ago called "Debating with Knives," and it came about because a group of us met like once a week and just talked about software over dinner, over lunch, and we were talking about this idea of switching viewpoints. And we came up with this scheme where we all sat around the table and we all had our knives left over because no one uses a knife when you eat barbecue. And so we alternated. So one knife would point in towards the middle of the table, and then the next person would turn their knife 90 degrees, and it would be a cross. And so that went around the table, alternating. And we started talking about something. I think it was testing or something like that. And the people whose knives were pointing into the table had to be in favor of whatever it is we're talking about. And the people whose knives were going acrosswise had to be against it. And then we debated for like 10 minutes. And then we switched the knives around. We rotated all the knives 90 degrees, and then everybody had to change his position and argue as well as they could for the other person's position. And at the end of that lunch, it was really interesting that people pretty universally said, you know, I hadn't thought about that side of it before, you know? And I think a lot of people came away from that. I'm not saying that was like a pivotal lunch for everybody, but it just triggered thinking that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so it's actually quite a fun game to play.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed in the best software engineers I know that they're very good at always saying, hey, let me give you a different opinion on that. Even if they agree with you, they'll still throw the contrasting opinion out there to consider it. Speaking, this segues perfectly into the big question we wanted to be talking about with you today.
The big question.
Because I think there are a lot of differing opinions on this. So I am excited to hear both viewpoints on this, which is what's your opinion and thoughts and experience with AI so far?
I am very pleased I've lived long enough to see it. And I am totally in awe of the people who thought they could take something as simple as chaining together, phonemes or whatever, and coming up with intelligent responses. I could never have imagined that would work, and yet it works phenomenally well. So I am so glad I'm around to see that. And recently, I have been doing pretty much all of my coding using Claude. And it was a kind of a hard-won battle in terms of I really didn't want to do it. And I was always very skeptical, in fact, not even skeptical, critical of the quality of code that it was producing. And honestly, I still am. But I've come to realize that doesn't matter. And so I've changed my opinion on that. And part of my thinking there was, I was thinking back to the really early days of software, where people were writing. I mean, they moved on from writing by moving wires around, and they were writing in assembler, and they were writing basically machine instructions and getting the computer to do what they want. And then along come two languages, Fortran and COBOL, both in the mid-60s, 50s, I mean. And they offered to take away abstract away the low-level knowledge of the machine that you had to have. And so people were writing code using, arithmetic expressions, or by using English, move this to this. And at the time, there was a massive pushback about that, because the hardcore assembler developers were saying, well, yeah, but you're not making full use of the machine. You're not writing good code. If you look at the assembler these things produces, it's crap, And despite that, people developed higher and higher level languages, more and more removed from the underlying architecture. And it thrived, and it was very successful, to the point where, honestly, most developers today probably couldn't describe the architecture of the machine on which they're running their code. If I said to you, how many registers does your machine have? What's a register? So I think that there's a degree of abstraction which it's acceptable, And the ironic thing is that starting sometime in the 80s, the compilers for these languages were actually producing better code than you could hand code assembler, because they could do all of the optimization, the register allocation and stuff that were very, very hard to do if you're a person. So fast forward to now, and I think part of my thinking now is that AI is a tool like a compiler, which produces code for you. And in the same way that you don't necessarily know what assembler your Rust compiler is generating, you don't know what Rust your Claude is generating. But do you care? And the answer is yes, you do care, but not down at the kind of detailed level that I thought you did. I thought that, I was looking at the code from a very human perspective, thinking this would be a nightmare to maintain for a person, but I'm not going to be maintaining it. And so what I want to do is to instead make sure that my AI can maintain it. I actually had, about a month ago, I spent a week with Claude. Basically, I said to it, how can I get you to write code so that you can then read it in future with the least effort? And we experimented, and it was actually kind of interesting. It decided it wanted to do a science experiment. So we set up a hypothesis, and it set up a whole bunch of experiments. And it was really funny because it managed to fool itself so they could run the experiment blind. And it produced all sorts of graphs and all sorts of correlations. And it turns out that some of the things that are good for people reading code are also good for AIs reading code. But some of the things that I personally think are horrible make it better for AI as well. So, for example, it was really, really big on having comments for every single function, every single module, which I personally think is a waste of time for people. But it said, no, what this does is it gives me a way to put extra context in that makes it easier to pick up when I come back to this code in future. It was very, very big on long variable names because that gives it a lot more context than I and J. And a whole bunch of things like that where it kind of surprised me. And so that's now part of my prompt is, use these rules for yourself. And the accuracy seems to have gone up a lot. So, yeah, I have pivoted, and I'm now pretty happy with it. But, I mean, tell me if I'm talking too long here because I'm just going to rant for a while. I think AI, in the same way that pretty much any powerful tool is an amplifier. And if you are a good developer, then it makes you a better developer. If you're a bad developer, it makes you a worse developer.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the reason is that there is a kind of experience that you don't capture by going through and reading a million source code, a million program files. There's an experience to do with, it's not a good idea to do it this way. It's a better idea to do this, or think about how you're going to configure that or deploy it or anything. A number of all these kind of like non-functional things that you know as a developer from experience, and that AIs don't really get. And so I constantly find myself with Claude just nudging it in certain directions. It'll write this whole big lump of code, and I'll say, "Why did you write that?" And it'll go, "Oh, because I can do this, 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 and this." And I said, "But we don't need to do that." Oh, away it goes. So I think to be an effective user of AI, you've actually got to have a fair amount of experience of writing code without an AI.
Right.
And that is the most worrying thing about this entire revolution, because where are those people going to come from 5 years from now?
Right. Yeah. So you're almost answering this question, but I want to get a little bit more specific about how, you've mentioned you're using Claude a lot, but how would you say that your programming has personally changed? Like you're talking about how you're kind of asking it the questions and you're saying, why did you do that? But how else would you say that you've really noticed the biggest changes in how you're actually programming?
So when I'm programming for myself, I typically don't write specs because I pretty much know how it's going to go. And so my programming, when I'm personally programming, is a lot of exploration. When I'm programming with Claude or whatever, I tend to use an agentic model. So I will have, currently I'm using Maestro as my environment. And the way that works is that you start off with a planning session and you describe what you want, and it asks you questions. And it then produces a detailed plan, a couple of 100 steps or whatever. And with Maestro, I can then say, okay, chunk that, and then run each chunk like autonomously. And it goes away and writes it. And I find that works really, really well. I am really happy with the granularity of it. I mean, obviously, I read through the plan before we start and just make sure that it's not going totally off the rails. but at the same time, it's not down to the lines of code level when it's planning it. And so it gives it a bit of freedom to surprise me. And when it does, it's typically either, I can't believe it was that stupid, or I can't believe it was that clever. And the cleverness far outweighs the stupidity, because the stupidity you can undo, but the cleverness was, I wouldn't have thought of doing that, and it did it. So I am, I can honestly say in the last 8 days, I've produced about 40,000 lines of Elixir.
Wow.
And I have not actually looked. No, that's not true. I opened one source file to look at something. And it's got 80-something% test coverage. And it seems to be pretty reliable. And it has, as far as I can tell, very good structure. And I know that I could not have produced what has been produced in that time. I probably couldn't have done it in 5 times that. So it's been very, very empowering.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I feel like it's gotten especially good recently. Like 6 months ago, Brooke and I were doing these presentations where we'd compare like which LLMs perform under the same circumstances, kind of like an experiment. And so I was presenting at a university earlier this week, and I was showing the students like, hey, we're going to have AI make a button that's going to be round and it's going to look like cartoony. And they're like, no, it's not going to work. It won't work. And then it worked better than any of us could have imagined. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
wow, it's coming
I
my
will
way.
say too, Claude seemed to be the one that was the most consistent. The other ones, ChatGPT and Gemini, sort of went in this like battle of which one was leading, which one was the worst. But Claude was always the most consistent, I would say, at least. So yeah, it didn't seem to take as many of its own liberties as one of the other does. But
Yeah.
And so long as you keep it in fairly short steps, right? Don't let it go and say, go write 50,000 lines of code, right? But if you keep it down to the very short planned out steps, and as long as you have a couple of agents running, so that one of them's writing code, one of them's looking at it and making sure it's okay, that kind of thing, I think then the results are incredible. And the thing I'm liking about code over the other two that you mentioned is that it is not as obsequious as them. It's a lot more likely to tell me I'm wrong. And I really like that.
Yeah. So there's Sonnet and Opus, right? Those are both Claude, right?
Yeah.
Which of those two do you feel like does the best for you?
Hang on a second, and I'll tell you, because I can't remember, to be honest with you. Rate limit exceeded, so I can't tell you. I honestly, I actually just went out on the web and asked them what they thought, and whatever it was they chose, I chose. I use Haiku for the planning stage, and I think it's Opus, but I may be wrong. I can't remember, to be honest with you. If I think it's Opus, it's probably Sonnet, one of the two. But every now and then I'll play around and try, like there's a Qwen 3.5 or something, which is supposed to be pretty good now. So I'll go and try that at some point. But no, I am very, I know that Claude is probably producing twice as much code that a human would write. But I've kind of got over that and just said, well, okay, if it works and if it is maintainable by it, then let's see what happens. And frankly, I cannot believe I'm saying that.
Wow. Yeah. So when I was talking to those students, it was interesting because they had the same question you were voicing, but from a kind of worried perspective. They were basically like, wait, so how do I get the skills to be able to do this now that AI is big and people like, how do I get a job? So what would your advice be to a young, college student who is trying to figure out how they can fit into this AI world?
So I have, for a long time, thought that college is not the best way of becoming a software developer. Um, I would personally really value a properly organized apprenticeship scheme.
Mm.
And I know in some countries they exist, not in the US, unfortunately. I think if I was a young developer, then I would see, the trouble is that's a big risk to take if you're 18 years old, saying, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to do this instead. But honestly, the idea of landing yourself with $250,000 in debt and not being able to find a job would also scare the crap out of me. I think if you could find a company that was looking for effectively slave labor, and you sign yourself up and learn through osmosis, I think that's probably a really good path nowadays.
Explain that a little bit, because I know in simplicity you're talking about this, like the Orient-Step-Learn, right? But I feel like, and you were alluding to this earlier, where if the good developers can use AI to be better, but if you're not a very good developer yet, if you're still young and learning, then they tend to overuse AI just to give them answers, and they're not building that scar tissue that you learn when you go and you make mistakes, right? I remember so often that I would do something wrong, and that was how I would learn the correct way, because I had done it the wrong way, and then someone showed me how a more effective way was to do it. But if they're not really getting that, then how does the Orient step learn for them, and how can they really use this AI to build up that scar tissue?
Well, I think that's a really great question. And I think the answer will be obvious 5 years from now. But I don't know if we know yet. I think part of me is thinking that what will happen is that people will, as they gain experience using AI to do this, then the rules of the game are going to adjust to that environment, the idea you're coding using AI, right? So the scars that you get will be scars from misusing AI, or AI making a mistake and you're not noticing, or whatever it might be, right? So the negative feedback you get is going to be different. And then from that, you will become a better AI developer. I think if you look at what differentiates software developers from real people, is that software developers are happy working in two separate environments at the same time. One of them is the messy, ugly world of reality, of dealing with people and messed up situations and everything else. And they are also comfortable dealing with the very strict, regimented world of software. Yeah. And they try to find ways of bridging that gap. And it's that ability, not their ability to code, but their ability to see what needs to be coded, I think is their biggest strength. And that doesn't change with AI, in that you still have to act as a kind of ambassador. Yeah. If you let your finance manager try and write, the next accounting suite, they may know everything there is to know about accounting, but it's going to be really, really bad software. Right? It takes a developer to understand the different rule set, if you like, of programming, to look for the abstractions that actually make it work. So 5 years from now, learning to be a developer will be learning to do what developers today do, which is make that leap from real world to artificial world. And then they will be the ambassadors, the translators of that real world to the AI. So I think there will still be a role, but it'll be a very different role.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's an
So-
interesting, just totally, just a neuron fired, and I may as well. There are two schools of object orientation. There's the American school, and then there's the European school. And the European school is very much to do with modeling, and objects and classes model the real world. And I think it was Norway. I'm fairly sure it was Norway. The birthplace of Simula, which means really it was the birthplace of OO. They actually, one of the universities there has an OO programming class, their introduction to OO programming, where the first semester is art appreciation. Right? They don't write a line of code, but they look at pictures and they describe what's happening. And, they start off by saying, well, it's a picture of a duck. And then they'll say, well, okay, and then by the end of the semester, they'll be working out, the motivation for why things are the way they are and what's happening and all this kind of stuff. And so they're learning to look at a situation and break it down and analyze it in terms of the stuff you don't see, which I thought was an absolutely fascinating approach to programming. And I think that's the kind of approach we maybe need to be thinking about now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say to companies and management and leaders about hiring these juniors in this year?
I would say that you have no option but to hire juniors. I think the idea that you can get whatever you're saying now, 5x, 10x out of your senior developers, yeah, you probably can. But when they all leave and get more money somewhere else, or when they retire, then what are you going to do? And so in the same way that baseball teams, sponsor farm leagues, you're going to have to sponsor junior devs and find a way of integrating them into what you do. Because if you can get a junior dev and actually get them writing code at twice the efficiency that they would otherwise do it, and writing good code, then you are so far ahead of where you are now, it would be crazy not to do it. Yeah. Now, it's not easy because nobody knows really how to train someone to do that. But I think you're going to have to learn. I mean, there's no option. So
That's actually one thing I've been very impressed with at our company, Matt and I, is we have a director, the technical program manager director, and she came up with this idea of creating a position that's sort of a liaison position between customer success or customer support and engineering. And so she took these basically junior engineers who have a foundational understanding of HTML and whatnot, but then she put them in this position where they were basically triaging the tickets and bugs that would come in from our customers or even internally, and then they would be the initial, like, okay, let's dig into this, let's try to figure this out. And then if they needed help, sure, they could get help. But then over time, they were then assigned a mentor and kind of worked little by little into the actual engineering team. And that seemed to work really well. But, it was a good way to do it because the position is really very helpful. It saved the engineers themselves from having to sit there and triage these bugs themselves. But, it provided a really good way to build up these juniors a little bit at a time. So it was, I think, a very effective way to go about it.
I think that's excellent. I mean, I was thinking back to when I first started getting paid for programming. Actually, the the thing I enjoyed I know there were two things I enjoyed the most. One of them was actually seeing somebody use my software. That always gave me a thrill.
Yeah.
But the other was I used to really love digging in the software to try and find out what caused a bug. It was always like, it was really satisfying, and it gave you, if you were doing it on code that you weren't familiar with, it really is the best way of learning that code, because you have to learn how to navigate it. You have to learn what it's doing. And along the way, I mean, the number of times I learned something brand new, like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, from looking at other people's code. It's a phenomenal way to learn. I think that's very, very clever to get people to do that. Of course, nowadays they would probably get an AI to do the triage, but
Yeah.
no, but that's a fantastic example of what you could do to get that kind of speed up.
I am also curious because as you've, we've had Dave come and speak at our company before, and so we've had some fun conversations with him. But you mentioned it this last one, Dave, that you have been working with a newer company for you anyway. I don't know if it's a newer company in general, but I'm just curious as you've either spoken with other teams or worked with them personally, have you seen any use cases or examples of how they're using AI that were either working really well and successful that you thought, oh wow, that's a really great use of AI, or conversely, that seemed to be hindering the team or causing more problems than solving, either or both of those?
So I'm working with a team right now, and the people on that team are pretty much universally poster children for the 10x or 100x or whatever the magic number is developer. They are stunning in terms of the amount of code they can produce and code that works. And when I first started working with them, they would say like, yeah, I'll get that done by tomorrow. And I'd be like, don't say that, that's impossible. And yeah, they got it done by tomorrow. But the other thing I've observed is that because it is so easy to churn out massive amounts of code, quite often people forget why they're doing it, and forget about the context in which that code has to live. And so I see teams becoming, what's the word? The software doesn't have the kind of cohesion that it needs. There's a lot of code and a lot of very clever code and a lot of very, very beautiful web pages and stuff. But there's kind of like a hole in the middle, where architecture would help. Now, that's based on a sample size of 2, I guess. So that may well be totally wrong. But that would be, you asked for my observations, and that's what I'm seeing.
Like that?
Wow. Well, so going back to Pragmatic Programmer, as Brooke was saying at the beginning, we kind of wanted to check in with your thoughts on Pragmatic Programmer. So given everything you've shared and what you have in simplicity, what do you think is the current state of being a pragmatic programmer in 2026 with AI and everything?
So I was thinking about that. One of the defining characteristics of Pragmatic Programmer is there's nothing new in it. It's all common sense, pretty much. And I kind of skimmed through it again a week or two ago, and it struck me that if you were to change some of the words, a lot of what's in there is not really about programming. It's about being effective. It's about how to make decisions. And to some extent, how to be nice. And I think that if you look at it that way, and like I say, if you just remove some of the more technical terms, you could argue that pragmatic programmer is really pragmatic living or something, pragmatic life. And I think to some, if you look at it that way, then AI makes no difference. If you just change the wording around a bit and change the context, shift it up a gear, I think it still applies. There are some things that are different, like the concepts of maintainability and readability change a lot in the AI world. And so I think specific advice in those areas would change. The advice around documentation would change. But a lot of it wouldn't. A lot of the ideas from like don't repeat yourself, make things easy to change, all of that kind of stuff apply. I mean, how you do that is different in an AI world, but the need to do it, I think, still stays.
Yeah. And I'd say maybe code smells apply even more now that we have AI.
Well, yeah, and actually, that was kind of interesting too. Is how do you teach an AI about code smells?
Yeah.
The other one that I've seen a lot lately as well is, and this goes back to how you're saying it's very much a human concept, just as much as advice for a technology professional. But it's the one I keep seeing a lot is humans over process. I think sometimes with AI, it's like there's such a push for AI everything and use AI in every instance, but in that, I feel like we're losing some of that human touch. And that's been, I think, a big challenge, at least in my little sphere. I'm constantly having to just kind of check back in with like, why would we do that though? Because you're losing that human to human connection, and AI can't do that. It just can't. Like, I know that there's this open claw, and there's talk of AI bot and AI bot talking with each other, and how there's more personality than ever with AI. But at the end of the day, it does not have a beating heart, and it can't empathize with someone across the screen. And that, I feel like, is something we need to be really careful of, is not forgetting that human connection, and that we can all empathize and really dig into the heart of something, and AI just can't do that.
Have you, just today, I think, Anthropic released an ad which speaks exactly to that. It is, if you haven't seen it, you have to go search it out. It's a guy talking to a therapist, and he says something like, I'm having a lot of trouble relating to my mother. I need to be able to talk better to my mother. What advice do you have? And then the therapist comes back and basically speaks exactly like an AI would speak. All right. So it's, I understand that you're having problems with your mother. I would recommend possibly doing the following. One, da, 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 da. Two, da, 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 da. Three, da, 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 da. But if none of those work, let me recommend a spring-autumn dating service which will allow you to have relationships with older women who are not your mother. And it was just beautifully constructed. And I think their idea was, we will never take ads. But it was a really good demonstration of where that breakdown can happen, But yeah, I don't know, because the other side of the coin is that AI is also remarkably empowering for people,
Yeah.
and it lets people get things done that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I don't know where you draw the line. The thing that bothers me the most right now is not being able to tell if something is human generated or AI generated. And I don't know why that bothers me so much, because it probably shouldn't. But it feels to me that is devaluing conversation.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't know if something is real or not even real, if it's product of, you know, wet tissue or dry silicon, it makes a big difference to me. And not being able to, you know, you can often tell, but often you can't. And that annoys me.
Look for the long hyphen.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
okay. So I write books and I'm a publisher, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you, I mean, Option Shift minus is an M dash, and I use it all the time, right? Because my editors have instructed me to use it because they tell me what it means and how to use it, you know?
Yeah.
And I know when I should use an N dash and not an M dash. So I write like an AI already.
Oh no.
Yeah. I don't know.
So funny.
Yeah, I'm always telling it like to avoid that, and then it does it anyway.
Yeah.
My wife is doing research at a university, and she also says the exact same thing with the N dash and everything.
There's actually there are AI models now you can feed AI generated text into, and they'll actually un-AI it.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I undo the AI-ness.
Yeah. So
That's funny. Oh man. Well, Dave, this has been really just such a delight to hear your insights and get your, advice and suggestions, everything. But I am curious too, like, is there any last bit of advice or thought that maybe we haven't covered yet that you just would like to share with everyone?
sure. I mean, first of all, I've got to say it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's always just fun, and that's my advice. I think in the midst of all this, you got to remember that what we're doing is quite difficult. You know, it's actually probably the fastest changing discipline that there has ever been in human history. I can't think of anything else that changes the ground rules so dramatically every year or two. And now we've got AI, which has just turned the entire thing on its head. On top of that, we are doing incredibly challenging work. I mean, if you showed someone from the year 2000 the kind of app that people are writing now, they wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't believe it was possible. And yet we're just churning them out, you know, on a production line. So we're doing incredibly difficult things in a very, very difficult environment. And it is, and at the end of the day, you come home tired, right? You haven't been doing anything physical, but you're still wiped from all the work you're doing. So if you choose to lead that life and you choose to put yourself through that, then I think you owe it to yourself to make sure that you're having fun. Because if you're not, why are you doing it?
Very, very true.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dave. You always have so much wisdom, and it's really so great hearing from you all this.
I don't know about that. Is that a fat Mr. Spock behind you?
Oh, did you see my Spock duck? Yeah.
Oh, it's a duck. Oh, fantastic. Oh, absolutely fantastic. I have a collection of rubber ducks too, so that's very cool.
Okay. It was one of at least, I don't know if they still do, but when you got hired at Limble, that was one of their welcoming gifts was a rubber duck.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And a copy
A rubber duck and your book. Yeah.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
What could you want? Set you up for life.
You sure have. And I think the advice here will help everyone listening. So to those tuning in, just let us know any thoughts or comments, and let us know what agile principles you find to have adapted or stayed the same for you and your team, and what you feel have changed. Let us know in the comments below. And this is the Dev Life.